Hello and welcome to Alexander Technique London. My name's Adrian and today we're going to be discussing, are you doing the Alexander Technique correctly? So I'm going to assume with this video that you have at least dipped your toe in the water. You've read some books or maybe you've already had lessons and maybe you're still in the early stages of your lessons. And it's a question I think is important because it changes the way you approach learning the Alexander Technique and really learning about yourself. I think it's actually more important to learn about yourself than the technique. The technique is really a way of learning about yourself, at least in my opinion. So we've got this name, Alexander Technique. So it's there in the name, isn't it? That word, technique. It's something you're going to have to do to get right. You do the technique correctly and maybe you'll benefit from it. And I think this is an unfortunate passing of language. I wish we could, and it's too late now, I wish we could drop the name technique, personally, and maybe just call it Alexander. You know, we have Pilates and we have Feldenkrais, and we could just have Alexander. As much as I would like that, I don't think it's going to happen, so I am an Alexander Technique teacher forevermore, I think. But that word technique is misleading. Because it does lead you down the rabbit hole of trying to do it correctly. And the more you try to do the Alexander Technique correctly, ironically, the more new interference you build up. Because what we're really trying to do is reduce interference. We're not trying to get you to do anything correctly, actually. We're trying to let the natural functioning just flow and work unimpeded. So what we're really trying to do is reduce interference. And if we reduce interference, functioning will just do itself, you know, your innate functioning. Obviously, there's a bit of a caveat around that because everyone's individual functioning is individual to them for all sorts of reasons, you know, including injuries and genital reasons and, you know, surgeries, illnesses. So it's finding your personal maximum availability. And the more you try to do the Alexander Technique correctly, the less you get there. Because you're always thinking about that rather than actually just freely going about your business. Now, that's not to say we don't want you to be able to make observations about how you're going about your business, because that's exactly what we do want. So really what we're trying to do is find out, can you observe if there's an interference pattern? And if there isn't, fine. If there's no interference going on, frankly, you don't need the Alexander Technique. What use is it? So when things are going well, just to enjoy it, don't try to keep overdoing the Alexander Technique on top of things naturally going well. You can do it if you want for purposes of topping up your thinking and your quality of awareness and presence. That's fine, and I recommend doing that. But you don't want to feel like it's a chore that you have to keep doing. So what you really want is to be able to learn to make observations about yourself. And that's how I really see the Alexander Technique, as a tool, as a filter to observe yourself and learn about yourself. As one of my colleagues put it, Mio Morales, he's got this phrase, the observation is the win. And I do like that phrase and use it frequently. Because if you've made an observation about yourself, you're halfway home. You can't change if you've not made an observation to change. Now, the hard thing about that is to be able to make that observation neutrally. And I've often said one of the hardest things about the Alexander Technique is to not be judgmental with ourselves. And, you know, we're only human. We are judgmental with ourselves. And in many ways, the better you get at the Alexander Technique, that doesn't go away. You just refine, you go, oh, you know, I should be able to do that better. You know, I'm an Alexander teacher after all. And, you know, you still judge yourself. It happens. But you try to at least work on diminishing that, be happy with the path you're on and sense improvements that you have made. But yes, that ability to make an observation, but neutrally. And it is hard. It is hard to be able to observe yourself neutrally and go, interesting. Now, something that I've had said to me a few times over the years by my clients, they'll say something like, oh, I was walking down the high street, I was looking shop windows, I saw my reflection. Oh, my posture was awful. I was like, oh God, got to come out of that. And I said, well, that was a mistake. And they go, what do you mean? So it should have stayed how you were. I go, well, why? I wanted to correct it. Yes, you wanted to correct it. What you didn't want to do is react out of it, which is what you actually did. So you won't find poise and freedom through reaction. So if you see that case where, you see your reflection, you are a bit slumped maybe, you go, interesting. Don't react out of it. Now become present. Think, how can I come out of this? And, without getting too technical with that terminology, I'll say, well, I can find support by letting my head go forward and up. I have context for that, which I understand for myself. If you ever watched any of my other videos, I'm obsessed with gravity. So I'm looking for the upward support that gravity provides us. That's where our posture is derived from. Can't have a posture without gravity. And we use it positively. I know a lot of people think of, going off on a tangent, but I know a lot of people think gravity is some sort of negative thing they have to fight. It's quite the opposite. My analogy is you can't swim without water. You wouldn't say the water's getting in the way of your swimming. That's obviously just nonsense. And the idea that gravity is negatively affecting your posture is nonsense. So, I know what I'm looking for. I know just enough anatomy to be useful. Don't want to know too much, because then you overthink. But I know just enough to know that this joint here, the atlanto-occipital joint, it naturally wants to roll forward. And as it rolls forward, you get length up the back of the neck. And I just only want to be using the upwards thrust from the ground. Yes, upwards. You'll have to look into that. Maybe check out one of my other videos. But I'll link to it, one actually down below in the comments. But, I just come back to myself and stop. And maybe if I'm really overreacting, maybe do a nice long out breath and just stop for a moment, just stop, inhibit, as we say. Not to be confused with the Freudian version, which sounds like repression. But in Alexander, it just means that ability to be cool and just stop and go, okay, let's collect my senses, come present again, and re-find myself. But I don't want to do it through reaction. So the first thing you do is you observe and stop. Stop. You've made the observation and just stop and just think for a moment and go, all right, what's my best way out of this? So it's more useful to know when things are going wrong than when things are going right. And when things are going right, you don't want to be going around thinking about that, because that in a way will be an interference. You'll be distracted in a way by that. And then you'll start being careful rather than carefree. Something I used to say a lot, want to be carefree but not careful, but certainly not careless. Said it so often I don't use that phrase so much anymore. But that ability to be minding your own business, and something just metaphorically taps you in the shoulder and goes, something doesn't feel right. And you stop and go, okay, let's come back to myself. Let's be present. What doesn't feel right? What can I do about it? And then, readjust and carry on. In the early days, you are probably going to think about it more because it's novel and you're trying to build up new habits. And that's just the nature of the beast. But in the long term, you really want to get to a point where you're not thinking about it so often. And you rather get this tap on the shoulder that wakes you up and says, I need to move, I need to change, I need to do something. But do it without reaction. It may just simply be sat at your computer, working away, and slowly but surely you find yourself like this because, it happens with computers. And then you go, I've noticed. Now I can come back. What you don't go is, oh God, because there's no freedom in that. That's a reaction. Whenever there's reaction, there's tightening, so you're just not helping yourself. So yeah, it's that ability to learn to observe yourself neutrally and recognize when things are going wrong. Now, in the early stages, that's harder to recognize and know. So it is a capacity you learn. You learn to observe yourself. You will learn to have the bandwidth mentally to be able to take the sensations on that tells you there's something to be observed. Because people, they're so wrapped up in their habits, they're not even aware that what they're doing half the time. And, it can take much longer for an ache or a pain to be loud enough for them to decide to pay attention to it. But hopefully, through the Alexander technique, you'll notice it earlier on and go, let's nip that in the bud. So, that's what we want. not to do the technique correctly, but to learn to use it as a filter to observe yourself, to learn about yourself, to learn to do things more freely. Now, it does take practice, and you don't want to make it a chore. Anything that's a chore, you won't keep doing. So in the early days, when you're first having lessons, you're probably going to be motivated by maybe, motivated by pain. You don't want to be in pain. That's a strong motivator. So you're very keen to learn your Alexander lessons, and that's great. Or maybe it's sports or musical performance. You really want to improve your performance. So you're really invested in learning this new technique. And that's great, but that will just naturally start to wane. It stops being a new toy. So what you want to do is find ways of attaching it to something else so you can keep topping up your opportunities to learn about yourself, observe yourself, or Alexander yourself, if you like. Be very careful with Alexandering yourself with things like neck free, head forward and up, because you see people kind of like this, doing head forward and up, and like, that's now an interference, isn't it? It's not natural. It's let the neck be free to let. It's all a letting. It's what happens when you're not doing this. So you want to be careful that you're not over-Alexandering yourself, but you're bringing Alexander observations and presence, learning about yourself, and attach it to either mundane tasks, which is something I do to make mundane tasks more interesting. My typical one is putting the washing out on the line, because you have to go into a squat to pick the washing up out of the basket, back up to put it on the line, and back down. You sort of up and down, up and down. And, no one likes putting the washing out. But if I Alexander myself, it's kind of interesting. I can observe myself in activity. I look at how much of myself I can freely use in this movement. And then it makes the activity more interesting, but I'm also working on myself at the same time. I may do it when I go into a low squat for any reason, because personally, squatting is not the easiest thing for me to do. Even from childhood, it's just the nature of my hips. Probably why, as a teacher, I'm obsessed with squatting, because it's something I'm personally not great at. So I've always looked at improving my availability there. So if I squat to take washing in or out of the washing machine, I will probably bring some Alexander thinking, be quite present to it, rather than just doing it willy-nilly without thought. The other time you can do it is for things you enjoy. So if maybe you enjoy running, you can turn running into a mindful activity. And that in itself can be a nice thing to do. Instead of it just being a mechanical slog, you suddenly turn it into a very psychophysical, mindful movement practice, which is a very nice thing to do. And that way you're topping up your ability to observe interferences and learn to negate them as well, or inhibit them. In the Alexander technique, we tend to use sitting and standing for that very purposes. It's just a generic vanilla flavored movement we do that with. But why not running or any other activity? Why not your yoga? Why not your golf? Why not this? Why not that? So things that you enjoy doing, especially if you think they're mindful practices in some way anyway, attach the Alexander technique to it and do both at the same time. And then you can go about your daily business, not actively trying to Alexander your way through every waking moment. Anyway, that's my view on this. So if you are interested in online Alexander technique lessons, I do have a 6-week dedicated program that I've developed over the years. So feel free to get in touch. Until the next video, take care, and I'll see you next time. All right, bye.